It is my great pleasure to welcome you to this open house for the Berkeley Folklore Graduate Program. I'm Charles Briggs, the chair of the program and a professor, and I'm very pleased to be able to give you a little bit of a history of the program, introduce you to some of its faculty, talk about its philosophy, um, some of the efforts we've made with respect to diversity and inclusion, and you'll even get to meet current students and a member of our alumni. So welcome aboard. First of all, with respect to the history, Berkeley Folklore has been part of the graduate program since 1965. It was founded primarily by Alan Dundes, one of the great folklorists of the 20th century and 21st, of course. And he led that for decades and trained some of the greatest folklorists around the country. And we are pleased to be able to celebrate his legacy. Our graduates include some of the most renowned folklorists, both in Europe, in the United States, and far beyond, some of whom you can see here: Regina Bendix, Valdemar Hafstein, Barbara Kirschen-Black-Gimlet, Timothy Tangerlini, who's now a current faculty member and the graduate advisor, and Patricia Turner. And please, sorry, there are many others. We just picked out a few to be able to introduce you to them today. Now, what does the program try to do? We take the field of folkloristics with a deep commitment to the way in which people have approached questions about folklore and developed folkloristic perspectives. But our goal is not simply to teach the existing knowledge. We want to train the intellectual leaders in the field for the future. We're hoping to be able to, and we continue to be able to, train people to provide a context in which they can flourish as scholars, think through the basic issues for themselves, and devise their own original and creative types of perspectives. We challenge our students to be able to be critical, right? To challenge the existing sort of ideas in the field, to engage theory. There's a strong emphasis on being able to think through the theoretical foundations of the field and develop new theoretical approaches. And also, for a long time now, to be able to think about how Eurocentrism, whiteness, racism, and colonialism have been woven into disciplinary foundations. And of course, collaboratively, to be able to explore the anti-racist notions that have often been sidelined by people like it. You can see in the images here, Americo Paredes and Gerald Davis. We emphasize theory. So trying to learn a broad range of different theoretical perspectives in the field, to learn synergies with adjacent fields, whether they be in literary studies, language studies, within visual cultural studies, archaeology, anthropology, performance studies, and so forth. Clearly gender studies, women's studies, queer studies, and many others. But also disability studies is now very important. And also a close engagement with a particular body of folklore. Now, one reason that people like the field often is they really care about something in the world, whether it's musical, narrative, visual, or some other dimension, and really interested in documenting those. So putting together the theory and something about the world is at the base of our program. Now here you see a picture of the Sather Gate, which is one of the great landmarks on the Berkeley campus. You'll see buses come and people will run over to take their selfies here and then, of course, at the Campanile or bell tower. And there are many legends actually about some of the figures on this gate. And I put that there to be able to suggest that we have our own faculty. It's drawn from around the campus for many humanities and social science departments. So we have members who are primarily whose appointments are in anthropology, the history of art, Italian music, Near Eastern studies, Scandinavian, Spanish and Portuguese, theater, dance, and performance studies. So we have a broad faculty with a broad range of different types of interests and expertise, all of whom work closely with students who are especially those who are interested in those particular areas.
And I should say that our students come from a wide variety of disciplines as well. They by no means track in from undergraduate programs in folklore exclusively. Some do. Back to you. We have to stay on schedule here, Charles.
Well, we offer three particular tracks within the graduate program. So one is a master's degree in folklore, which is open to all persons with an undergraduate degree. You certainly don't have to have a background in folklore per se. Our students come from all over. Ruth Goldstein, who received her MA in folklore and then her PhD in medical anthropology, and now is on the faculty of the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was a practicing ethnobotanist and community garden manager when she came into the program. We also offer to students who gain entrance into a PhD program anywhere in the humanities or social sciences something called a designated emphasis. It's kind of like a joint degree in folklore and history of art, anthropology, performance studies, one of the language or and literature departments, and people pursue them, basically take the same requirements as master's students, but then also are pursuing their PhDs. But some folks join one of those PhD programs and then decide that they would like to do the master's program and write a master's thesis at the same time. So we have these three different options. I want to emphasize that Berkeley will not allow you to apply to more than one graduate program at a time. So you have to, on your graduate application, you have to list the master's degree in folklore or one of the PhD programs as your major degree. Your first year of study, by the way, the first year of study this year has changed a little bit. This is, of course, our first cohort. That's not many of them actually here in Berkeley. One is in Los Angeles and one is in Japan right now. But this is kind of common that we are now actually working virtually. We kind of hope that maybe next year, fall class will actually be here. It makes a big difference. We are a very tight-knit social community. Folks are very supportive of one another, and partly because we have a space called the Folklore Archive downstairs in this very building where students study together and talk together and eat together, and also interact with undergraduates, and therefore provide social and intellectual support at the same time that they all pursue their individual courses of study to which they're so dedicated. And we hope that that will be the case next fall, but this year, the first year of study is being undertaken virtually. We have a core course in folkloristics called Theories of Traditionality and Modernity. I'm teaching it right now. It introduces students, first of all, a little history of the field and ways in which people have thought about, what is modernity, what is traditionality, how have notions of traditionality been used to create racial and class others, and therefore to sort of make people seem as if they're not quite as part of the modern program since the 17th century. Unfortunately, that often goes on today. So it's really important to understand some of those deep roots, which are now just written into the common sense of ways that people think about folklore, modernity, art, philosophy, and other things. So we have a year-long core course sequence, which is also taken by folks from anthropology, from a host of other departments at the same time. Um, and it's quite a robust graduate seminar. The second half, the spring course, is taught by either a member of the Berkeley Folklore graduate faculty or quite often a visitor who comes from anywhere in the world as a visiting professor of folklore and anthropology to provide a different perspective on the field. So again, emphasizing a variety of different approaches and theories of the in the field of folkloristics. We have a foreign language requirement, extremely important to make sure that people can read the bodies of research that are relevant to the topics that engage them. Often it also involves a foreign language that is crucial for the student's own engagement in their folklore thesis research. There's an undergraduate course, which I usually teach, which provides an overview of the field of folkloristics. We ask students who have not had an introductory course like that to take this course. It kind of complements the the sort of deep dive graduate theory course with with an introduction which provides some familiarity with a range of different theoretical perspectives, as well as all the interesting stuff that anthropologists have done and continue to do over time. We ask students to take a methodology course because when you start to begin your thesis research, if it's in ethnography, the study particularly of engagement um, with, um, with living subjects, you kind of want to know how to do that. If you're working in museums or in the field of materiality, you want to know what materiality and museum studies are all about, literary studies, archival studies, historical studies. So we offer a variety of different methodology courses across the university and ask students to be able to take one of them. And then students choose their own graduate seminars in areas that are specifically related to their interests and will help prepare them for their future research. After the first year, people engage in their thesis research. Here are a couple of our students. The one on the left is not actually, was taken by one of the research subjects of one of our students, Leah Lothorpe, who got a BA here at Berkeley, who then went off to the University of Pennsylvania and did her graduate studies, and then came back and wrote her dissertation here. She is actually the performer in this photograph in Kerala, India. On the right is Bob Ofer Westort, a current student who did his work in South Sudan, here pictured engaged in his field work. And now Professor Lovell will tell you about the second year.
Sure, happy to. The second year focuses on the thesis itself, the individual piece of work that represents the culmination of one's studies at Berkeley. Based on the methodology and the background of the first year, students will come out of that first year with a topic, with a good concept, with a literature review, and we'll be ready to launch over that first summer into field work, which has been really difficult for the students this year. But next year, hopefully next summer, students will be able to do that, to do field work. They will, in many cases, be using their language that they have that they took an exam in during the first year. They will pick an advisor and a committee of faculty whose business it is to help them realize their really, really good idea. Secondly, that second year, there are two other things that one is doing during that second year. One is students are often working as GSIs, which is the same thing as a teaching assistant at other institutions. And that way they get to work on a one-on-one basis with faculty members, learning how to teach and explain things, and in some cases learning whole new fields just under the umbrella of teaching them. And third, during that second year, students are very often engaged in doing applications, applications for PhD programs or for jobs. And this is where that mentor and the committee come in handy. They help one find the appropriate programs and write letters of support and that sort of thing. So the basic task of the second year is realizing one's really, really good idea and pulling together a thesis, a complete draft by spring break and a complete thesis by the end of that second year.
I might just add a notice to why you see the photograph on the right. That's LaShawn Daly. She's now finishing a PhD in performance studies here at Berkeley, but she's a 2015 graduate of the Folklore MA program. And she is now publishing part of her thesis in the journal Meridians, Feminism, Race, and Transnationalism. So we encourage our students to make sure that more than 3 members of a thesis committee get to read their work. Actually, theses are now available digitally through the library, so a lot of people can read them, but to put them out there in the form of books, book chapters, journal articles, because frankly, we really believe in the research that our students are doing. I don't know, Professor Lovell, if you want me to jump into this or if you'd like to talk about pathways beyond the masters.
Why don't you? It's your turn.
All right, I'll go for it. So, what do people do with the degree? Lots of things. Many people use this as a really valuable stepping stone to get into a PhD program. And not just to get into any PhD program, but to get into particularly the PhD programs in which they want to enroll and to get one of those really great fellowships that will fully support them through the years of that program. Our track record is extremely good. Many of our students, like LaShawn, for example, go on at Berkeley with great fellowships. You'll actually hear from another master student in folklore, Cameron Johnson, who's there on one of those little screens as well, who's now currently in anthropology. We have had students graduate in anthropology, medical anthropology, and in performance studies, and a range of different sort of programs here at Berkeley. But people also go around the country and beyond and join other PhD programs. So some students come and do the master's program because they're not exactly sure what they want to do in terms of a PhD program, which discipline, and also exactly what area of that discipline and what kind of research topic do they want to develop. Let me give you, I'm not really big on advice, but here's a little bit of advice. You do not want to jump into a PhD program and then about 2 years into it decide, I don't think this is really what I want to do, or this is not really the place I want to be. It really isn't a whole lot of fun. So if you come and really develop your ideas and develop contacts with people in the field, that's a really good stepping stone. And it also helps to make sure you are the most competitive PhD applicant you can find. Now, one thing you get with the Berkeley graduate program is that all of us sit there every year on PhD um, admissions committees. So we know exactly what people are looking for in those applications. We know what sorts of things really help you in terms of building your application, the letters of recommendation, the sort of courses you might want to take. If you want to get into a really good PhD program in the history of art, taking a course with Professor Lovell and other folks in that field and getting a letter of recommendation, for example, is really good. But that's not all we do. We're not just interested in people who are doing what we do, who are professors in Research One universities. We want to think about people doing a variety of things that meet their own goals in life. So if you look, for example, at this photograph, that's Monica Foote. Oops, sorry, Monica. She holds a Berkeley folklore MA. She went on and got a PhD in folklore at Indiana University, and now she's a permanent staff member at the American Folklife Center at the Library of Congress. So she's somebody who is a public folklorist, somebody with a very strong training in the field of folkloristics, who's now working in this case, a state agency, but there are people who work in NGOs, in museums, who work in activist organizations, in corporate settings. Almost every state has a state folklorist. Museums have folklorists. This is extremely important in terms of community-based work. Some of our leading folklorists, the best people coming out of graduate school, say, I want to help transform the world. So I want to be able to work outside of the university in public settings. And that's also an important goal for many of the students in our program. Now, diversity. I want to say that um, this is one of the most fundamental components of our program. If we don't have a strong commitment to diversity, frankly, we should be doing something else with our time today. We need to really continue to challenge the underrepresentation of many groups in the United States within the field of folkloristics and so many other fields. Berkeley Folklore starts with the Graduate Introduction to Folklore Studies with its key commitment. If you don't question and think about the way in which knowledge is produced in the discipline and challenge those modes of exclusion of folks who are scholars from underrepresented groups in coming up with the fundamental ideas in the field, then frankly, it's not going to be transformative. And that's been the core of the Berkeley program for almost 2 decades. On the slide there, and we can make these slides available, of course, later on, you'll see a brief history of the program that I wrote in a newsletter that's in Finland, which really talks about the importance, right, of scholarship, which challenges decolonial scholarship to the folklore program. We also this year in the graduate introduction, which I mentioned that I'm teaching, we're having conversations with leaders in the field, often the people with whom whose texts we're reading, who are talking about their own experience coming into academics, their reading of leading works by Americo Paredes, for example, by a range of different people, Zora Neale Hurston, et cetera, in the field, and themselves talking about barriers to diversity and equity and inclusion within the field, and also the ways in which they think that we can challenge those barriers. What do we do? In terms of being able to advance these goals, there's no way the faculty members can do this. We require a diverse, in every way, group of graduate students to be able to think about these goals, to be able to collectively forge new futures for the field of folkloristics. And we are remarkably lucky to have an incredibly good group of graduate students who are helping us realize this goal. But I will tell you, we're falling still short. We're one of the most diverse programs among graduate programs in folklore, but that's nothing to be happy about today. We need to keep pushing ahead, and that's why we're really glad to be in conversation with all of you and have a chance to get to know you and answer your questions a little bit later on. We do everything we can to be able to provide funding to graduate students. And one great opportunity we have through the graduate division is the Graduate Opportunity Fellowship, which is specifically geared towards achieving diversity, equity, and inclusion goals for the folklore graduate program. So maybe I'll hand it back to you, Professor Lovell, with respect to funding for graduate students.
Sure, sure. Our goal for the graduate students in the MA program is to leave this program with an MA confidence and competence in this field and no debt. What does that mean? That means that most of our students do work during the time that they are graduate students, generally speaking as GSIs or TAs, which is helping faculty members with their undergraduate classes. And secondly, there is a position for an archivist, which is a paid position that one graduate student each year gets. There are fellowships, there are modest fellowships and grants, and some RA-ships, research assistantships. And we encourage and help students to get outside money, particularly for the field work. There are lovely pockets of money there in Jan for getting people on an airplane when that's a good idea to go to do their field work. I just have one sort of further footnote here. Some students are wondering, well, what kind of student is a success in this program, which is obviously challenging and fast moving and full of ideas. Generally speaking, I would say resourceful students, creative students, curious students, and those who are used to persevering, whose sense of achievement it doesn't come doesn't come with expectations that it will come fast. There is a sense of the need for doggedness and perseverance, as well as other important skills. Creativity, of course, is extremely high on the list of characteristics. There, I think, is our visiting faculty member who's going to talk to us about research. Didn't I just hear him join us?
Hang on one second. So before we get off funding, I want to emphasize the FLOSS, Foreign Language and Area Studies Programs Grants. This will provide you with almost all of the money for a year of your graduate studies, and the Folklore program supplements that with enough to bring that up to full support. This is a separate application that you must make to one of the areas where these grants are available. For example, for Southeast Asia, for Latin America, for other areas of the world. So look in the on the what is available through the graduate division and see if your interests line up with those. That involves language training, Middle East, for example, Middle Eastern studies, language training, as well as area studies courses, but it's a great source of funding. So let's see,
It is here.
Yeah, I've been online for about 15 minutes.
All right, great. Well, then we can, speaking of resources, maybe we'll just finish up with some of what's available through the program, and then we're going to hand it over to Professor Tangarlini, who's going to talk about the wonderful research that he's doing. But maybe Professor Lovell, if you could talk about some of these other resources we have available at Berkeley.
Oh, sure, of course. Very quickly, Berkeley has exceptional resources for study in this area. So we don't just, students that don't just depend on field work and going elsewhere. We have wonderful collections in the Hearst Museum and in the Berkeley Museum and Pacific Film Archive. The quilt that you're looking at in this slide is one of 400 quilts by a African-American woman in Oakland, from Oakland. 400 quilts by this one woman that was recently given to Berkeley. So huge collections of that sort have come here. There are also papers of notable folklorists here in the Bancroft Library, and of course the folklore archive itself, which is dates from the middle of the 20th century, and is a huge compendium of resources that are available for graduate students working in this area. There are 24 libraries at Berkeley that students use, and there are extensive collections. The research library, resources in the libraries at Berkeley are number 10 in the country for research libraries. So I think, is that it quickly? Oh yes, and of course the faculty, a terrific set of not only faculty but also fellow graduate students, and every year a visiting faculty in folklore is invited to come from elsewhere to enrich the teaching of Berkeley faculty. So there's a constant constant set of new ideas and new faces in the program.
So now we're going to turn it over to Professor Tangarlini, who couldn't be with us the whole time because he had a really good excuse. He's teaching right now, but apparently he's orphaned his students for a little while to be able to join us and talk about his own research. And I'm putting up a slide, which is an invitation to actually listen to him lecture about his work tomorrow afternoon. So, hello?
Yeah,
Take
hi.
it away.
Yeah, so thanks for putting that up, Charles. And I've asked my students to work in breakout rooms, and they'll be there for the remainder of the evening until I shut them down. I'm teaching a course right now on Nordic folklore and folk narrative. I liked it was a great segue that Margareta gave me, perhaps unwittingly. She was talking about the remarkable size of a lot of the collections that you have an opportunity to work with here at Cal, and everything from the folklore archive to the quilts to millions and millions of books. And I think what is inherent in what she's saying is that folklore really is one of the first big data fields in the humanities. And so taking that to heart, I work a lot with what is now come to be known as computational folkloristics, which is sort of the data-driven analysis of informal culture at smallish scale to very large scale. So this is something that all folklorists are completely comfortable with, is working with 1,000 stories or 10,000 stories or 350 informants, or something on community level to national or even global level data, where expressive culture is circulating on and across social networks. And if you think about that, one of the things that's happened in the context of both ubiquitous and powerful computing, as well as, let me see if I can share some quick slides here. Maybe Charles can allow me to share some slides. Is this idea that we can take advantage of computational affordances to start to understand some of the many things that we encounter when we're doing field work and when we're doing archival work. So a lot of my work lies at this sort of intersection of networks, folklore, and literature. And Margareta pointed to the incredible resource that is the UC libraries, and not only Berkeley's library, but recall that you have access to all 10 campuses of the University of California. We often talk about the power of 10, and that really is something that you feel as a graduate student at UC. I know this because I was a graduate student. It must have been many years ago, at least 7 years ago. I was a graduate student at UC Berkeley, studying with Alan Dundes and also in the Scandinavian program in folklore, and already started at that point to work with people in computer science and information studies and things like that, to see if we could devise methods for the study of folklore at scale. So that's some of the stuff I do. I do it all the way back to the medieval things like sagas, and all the way up through the 19th century with narrative from Scandinavia, all the way up to the 20th and 21st century, working with things like K-pop dance, which you might think, well, how is that folklore? Well, a lot of the way that you learn dance is informal, and it's a form of expressive culture. So we're devising a search engine that would allow you to use a segment of dance as your search term, instead of trying to describe it with words, which will never work. And we're getting pretty close to having something that we can work with. I work a lot with geographic information systems, to try and understand distribution patterns, but also to try and devise ways of classifying texts that are not preordained by some organizational system, but rather are driven by research questions, and then try to understand what we learn at different levels of granularity as we move through these very, very large collections. So the collection I work with in Denmark is stories told by 4,500 named individuals, and it's about 250,000 stories. We do things like we devise methods for taking apart complexes of stories. And this work that we did on storytelling in Denmark has unbelievable applicability to conspiracy theories in social media in the present day. So here you can see one of the decompositions of stories being told on Reddit and 4chan about Pizzagate, which has in recent years, since 2016 December, been completely subsumed in QAnon, which is also a conspiracy theory that's feeding a lot of actual real-world behaviors of people in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is an opportunity for folklorists really to be at the very front line and working collaboratively across groups such as public health, computer science, political science, and of course, folklorists making a fundamental contribution to our understanding of what's going on in these spaces that all of us are living in, and all of us are being influenced by. And a lot of, interestingly, the work can also be applied backwards to things like Icelandic sagas, because they were also people and they had many of the same social networks that we had, and a lot of their stories were circulating on these social networks. We can extract those from even things like medieval documents. So it's not the only way of doing work, but it's a very interesting way of doing work, and it's pushing the boundaries of transdisciplinary work, and I think there are going to be opportunities. Because I talk very frequently to people at large companies in Silicon Valley, and they're constantly saying, we've got the engineers, that's not the problem. What we don't have are people who understand the fundamental and underlying cultural challenges and cultural problems that we are up against. So that's sort of, I was told to keep it very short, and that's sort of like my very short dive through all of the different ways in which I've been trying to address problems in folklore, everything from classification to mapping to decomposition of narrative frameworks to generative models for understanding how social and cultural expressive forms get negotiated on and across social networks, to even things like devising a search engine for dance segments, so that we can say, show me the first time on YouTube when somebody used this movement as part of their dance, rather than trying to type that out just to take a snippet of a little dancer and use that and construct complex searches across maybe something like K-pop, or maybe you take it across all dance videos on YouTube and TikTok for all time. Maybe you can start to map things like influence and change in something that folklorists have been interested in for a very long time, and that's kinesthetic expressive culture.
So thanks very much. Again, if you want to hear a little bit more, tune in tomorrow. You might need to send an email to the Berkeley Folklore Archive website. So if you write me, I can put you in touch. So thanks very much for leaving your class aside and joining us. But I know that all of you are waiting to really listen to the stars of the show. And now it's time to bring them on board. So I would like to introduce a current student, Cameron Johnson.
Myself really quick. Hey, this is, I guess, it's a folklore program, so it's totally fine and acceptable for me to share an origin story. Yeah, it's a trip being here right now, especially with Dr. Briggs and Nectar as well. I am a Bay Area local, born and raised, first generation college student, was a transfer student in an undergrad program at Berkeley a little while back. I came into the rhetoric department. I wanted to do child law advocacy. I had my heart set on that. And I was flipping through the courses and I saw the Forms of Folklore 160 AC. I was like, that sounds interesting. And I pulled it up, and I kid you not, the cover had Jose Limon on it and Americo Paredes. And I was like, I'm going to take this class. I took the class, and, I fell in love with the discipline of folklore, and that's kind of the cuter side of it. But the reality is folklore has continued to be a part of academia where I can see people like me expressing and defining our own narratives. That was tremendous for me. Going into the archive and imagining myself there, was and now is a reality and pretty awesome. At the time, the folklore program brings in absolutely amazing visiting scholars. I had the unbelievable luck, I can't say anything other than it's luck, but Dr. Steve Feld was there when I was an undergrad. He's the ethnomusicologist. he's who you want to know and learn from there. And we were talking about how hip hop for me, I view it as my own archive. It is, you know, these samples are amicably created archives, expressions of my own history. And he was like, run with that. And I ran with that. And I was a URAP underrector and Charles when I was about 20, and it was pretty rad. But I wanted to do something. That's why I wanted to do folklore. And when I finished, I wanted to go out and put what I learned in the program to use. And at the time, that meant that I wanted to get involved with community archiving and community history. I worked with the National Park Service, and I worked with a Japanese American legacy archive, where we built our own open source software. And it was absolutely amazing. And I decided I want to go even further. I came back to the folklore program to do it at the master's level. And I decided I just can't stay away. And now I'm also doing the anthropology PhD here at Berkeley. I don't know, I don't want to take up too much time, but if I can I screen share really quick? I'm going to do it. All right, it's like super nerdy, but I just wanted to show this because, you know, my whole life I have dreamed of going and seeing the world elsewhere and making connections with communities that I feel I have always had a lot of ideological commonalities with. This is when I went as part of my field work with the folklore program to South Africa last summer. This is at the Black Power Station, which is out in about 8 hours away from Joburg, 3 hours outside Cape Town in Makanda. And these are the owners of Mabu Vinyl, the world famous record shop, they were kind enough to give me a studio space in their record shop. This is a punk legend from South Africa that I grew up listening to, who is part of my research now. It's just been, you know, the most immense, the little makeshift office at Mabu Vinyl, but it has been the most amazing experience for me. And once again, it has proven to be a place where I've felt not only safe, but encouraged to be here. And folklore has always been that. And so no matter what discipline I'm in, I'll always be a folklorist. And yeah, the community at the Folklore Archive is home. I'm gonna stop screen share.
Thanks a million, Cameron. That was amazing. Now we have Cameron's in his third year, right? Wrapping up his master's program. We have now a first-year student, Julia McQuoon, who is going to talk about herself and her research. Take it away, Julia.
Hey y'all, so I don't know if I can follow that, you know, putting the third year first, you know, makes me seem much less prepared, but I think that's actually probably a good lens to see, because I know when I was in, you know, meetings like this and I was listening to everyone talk about all of these amazing projects, I thought, like, how could I ever be doing that? And I'm right now kind of in the middle of that figuring it out space. And this is my second semester, but it's my first year. And I've been talking to some of the new students who just got here, and they're like, well, how do you know all of this stuff about what you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. It just happened. You know, I was in these classes and thinking about this theory and thinking about where I wanted to do this work, and this project sort of started coming together. So I came to Berkeley via Peace Corps, actually. I was doing 2 years in Morocco, finished up, and came over here all very kind of crazy. I got in about a month and a half, maybe 2.5 months of quote unquote normal graduate school before the pandemic hit. So I have, you know, I had the privilege of actually seeing inside of the Folklore Archive. But I do really believe that the community with the other graduate students, especially that we've been able to form based on, you know, the program and the way that it works, it transcends the digital space. Absolutely. They are my friends here. They are my family. And yeah, just like, again, try not to take up too much time either. half an idea of what I'm doing, which is about as much as I have at the moment. But I'm looking at researching queer narratives and placemaking in Rabat, Morocco, and looking at how these ideas of queer spaces can be both legibilized and illegibilized, meaning like made readable or visible and made invisible, because the Moroccan government, being any type of homosexual in Morocco is illegal, and yet people are creating these spaces that have to be known and yet unknown. And in that exploration, I also have to do a little bit of kind of deconstructing the idea of privilege and connection. I am non-binary. I use the pronouns they, them, and she, her. And in kind of figuring out my identification to the queer community, and the fact that the capital of Morocco was a place where I was able to act out aspects of my identity that I was not able to do in this tiny town that I lived in, is not the same as queer Moroccans who live, you know, this life every day and who have very different sort of like punitive interactions that they have to deal with if they choose to date. And one of the ways that that has manifested recently is there was in April and May of this year, someone who is a trans woman who got on social media and told a bunch of people to go out, most of her followers are female, told them to go out, create fake dating apps, and basically try to trap gay men in Morocco and expose them to their families and expose them potentially to authorities and to jail time. And in, you know, that's a very small sort of instance of kind of like a bigger project that I'm looking at. But in the second half of the theory class, which I'm now in, I'm able to look specifically into this interaction, into how it relates to kind of the theories of folklore, and really ask the question of how someone who is of this community could do something like this to this community. And in doing that, I'm also able to question how being of this community and yet not being fully of this community, kind of where I come in. So I think for me, I've really found a community here that allows me to, you know, have to question myself and have to question where my positionality is in the research, but also offers a space to like investigate and kind of imagine a different idea of research and a different idea of what a product of research could look like. And I'm gonna put my email in the chat. So anyone who has any other questions in case I have to duck out early, feel free to send me a message.
Thank you so much. I'll tell you, she's one of the brave students who envisioned getting on airplanes and talking to people in person, and all of a sudden is entirely reconfiguring her research for the COVID-19 world. It's now my great pleasure to introduce you to Folklore MA graduate, social cultural anthropology PhD graduate, and now assistant professor of anthropology at MIT, Hector Beltran. Welcome back, Hector.
All right. Thank you so much for the invitation. Always nice to see you, Charles. You know, great mentor of mine. One of the best parts of the program to see you, Cameron. You know, we work together at Berkeley. I'm over here in Cambridge, Somerville area on the East Coast. I can't say I don't miss Berkeley and the Bay Area, to be honest. And yeah, so my career started in the folklore program. So I studied computer science in undergrad, then had some different ideas once I went out into industry about how culture worked out in the real world, applied to some programs, you know, got into the MA program at Berkeley. And my project started out as a community project with a group that identifies as Indigenous Maya there in Oakland. So, you know, as I was thinking about some of the social media infrastructures that were part of the work I was doing there, teaching computing and even graphics and different ways to tell stories with that group, I started more thinking about different hierarchies of race, relational formations of race, narratives of migration. And it all sort of came together, not only because there was this really nice community that comes with the folklore program. You have a few students that are really helping each other out. There's a sense of camaraderie that you know, other students have brought up, but also just at Berkeley, you get to take classes in ethnic studies, education, media studies. You know, there's all these great departments that can enrich your project and just your thinking, right? I mean, I was new to graduate school, also a first generation student, you know, had gotten this computer science degree at MIT, but now I wanted to connect it with these, you know, more sophisticated ways of thinking about social life. And it was a perfect opportunity to do that. And also realize you know, do I, or think about if I really wanted to do graduate school. So this 2-year terminal program, so yeah, this is what I want to do. I'm going to stick it out, apply to the PhD program in anthropology, again, under the mentorship of Charles. And, you know, I think as my project morphed into, so now you can, you know, also to keep it short, but now my project is about hackathons and how this concept of hacking traverses borders, specifically between US and Mexico, but also back to thinking about different engines for making difference across these borders, and you know how technology comes together with these different socio-cultural elements, right? And even now, as I see my job transitioning into this role here at MIT, where I'm teaching mostly engineers, you know, over 60% of the students are computer science majors. Now I'm still doing this type of bridge work, right? Taking some of these core concepts that I learned in folklore, and you know, once you're in the program, you'll know when to throw out the F word or not. Like, how, when do you identify as a folklorist, when don't you? But more importantly, when do you bring in some of these concepts, some of these core concepts about traditionality, modernity, difference making, defending, enacting, producing particular borders around disciplines, around different communities, around different forms of, of, of knowledge making, right? And I think that has been useful, even as now I think about how to teach different types of students, how to see my own work traversing particular disciplinary borders. And I think folklore was foundational for that, right? I think I'm still there, as Cameron said, you know, once you identify as a folklorist, you're always a folklorist. And you know, even you know, I'm proud to say, a surprise for me here, one of my best students in my Cultures of Computing class, Luisa, showed up here to the folklore open house. So it's nice to see all these connections coming through here, and how in the end, you know, everything is connected. Like, how do you go from folklore to computer science to teaching engineers at MIT? But I think more than anything, folklore will show you how it's all related. And happy to answer any questions, or you can shoot me messages at any time, hectorb@mit.edu.
Victor, thanks so much. I mean, we know how busy assistant professors are, so you know, taking this time out is a really great gift for the program. Now, listen, I'm sorry. Guess what? Surprise! We're running a little bit late. We never do that in academic institutions, right? But that now this is your time for all of you to be able to ask any questions that you'd like. I myself um, am fine going a little bit over the 5 o'clock hour. Anybody who needs to duck out, please feel free to do so. But I would love to hear what questions you might have about the program. So just please, you know, when we see you unmute yourself, we'll know that you want to jump in there.
Oh, hi, I guess I'll be the first one to ask a question then. My name's Hunter, they, them pronouns. I am a recent graduate of K College in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I came across your program when I was like doing a bunch of research trying to figure out next steps with everything going on. And it's really cool. And this talk has made me love it even more. And I was wondering what like the balance focus, like if there were aspects of like Jewish folklore, like what is that like at Berkeley with the folklore program?
I could probably jump in there. We've had students who focus entirely on Jewish folklore. We have a really vibrant Jewish studies program. One of the members of the faculty, Ben Brenner, has been the director of that. So that's a really, really strong crossover. Near Eastern Studies also is a really important hub of research here at Berkeley. So that is a very, very strong connection. So so I think that Jewish folklore is one of the foci, right, of within the field of folkloristics, and I think it's very well represented on the faculty and among student interests as well as at Berkeley. We really want people to reach out. You get a thesis committee with 2 members of the graduate group. We happen to have 2 people who specialize in Jewish folklore in the graduate group, but then you also find somebody from anywhere around the university who's really closely aligned with your interests, who's a 3rd member of your committee. So that sort of flexibility, we really want you to be able to really master the basics of folkloristics, but then go where your interests drive you. So
And I just had a very quick, at least I'm hoping it's quick follow-up question. And I was wondering, for the writing sample asked for the folklore program, what kind of writing are you looking for with that sample? Like, can it be any form of writing, or do you want it to be like specifically like a senior thesis, or?
would either Professors Lovell or Tangolini want to jump in on that one?
Anything that shows that you can take on a digestible research question, structure it well, support it with evidence, and mostly we're looking to see, your writing and your research style, so that basically we want to make sure that you'll fit in and that you'll enjoy yourself, and that we'll be able to give you the types of support that we can to bring you to the level that we want you to be at when you graduate, and then I'm sure that you want to be at. You'll probably far exceed our expectations. That's my general sense, even if our expectations are extremely high.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey there, I got a question about Tim Tangolini, your work on the. So you have a thing tomorrow. Is it like a presentation you're giving, or is it another thing like this about specifically like kind of? I'm really interested in what you talked about with like treating the COVID conspiracies and QAnon in with your study of folklore and how that is coming together. Is that are you presenting on that tomorrow? Is that something?
Yeah.
Cool.
So
Okay.
I'll talk about how we conceptualize this research, how we do it. I probably won't go into unless Hector wants me to. I won't go into the machine learning aspects of this too much. There's a little bit of machine learning involved. There's a lot of natural language processing, but really what I want to do is present how we conceptualized it, how we work with this very, very noisy data, and then what we discovered about how people in their online chats and discussions negotiate the boundaries of a complex,
it's super
dynamic
cool.
storytelling environment.
It's
What's
crazy.
wonderful is
That's
that
really cool.
we inferred this from a lot of our field work.
Yeah.
But with social media, we can see it at a very large scale. Even though it's incredibly noisy, we're able to pick up on what turns out to be a fairly strong signal, and we use that to derive the underlying narrative framework, we call it, that it might be generating, or in our model is a generative model. So it lies at the basis of sort of new posts, right? So you could use our model to generate new posts in this discourse arena, and you would not be kicked out of the chat group.
Yeah. Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah, that's fun.
That's really
terrifying,
cool.
but fun.
I would. Yeah. So that's tomorrow. What time is that going to be at?
I have to hold on a second. Let me find.
I could also send an email to someone like.
Let me just pull up the is it at 4? Charles is talking, but nobody can hear him.
Yeah, I can't hear nothing.
I've asked him to unmute himself.
Yeah, I got people in my life who are into that stuff, and it's really hard to engage. It is like a world, and it's just really interesting what you're talking about. And then the computer side of it, I'm actually having a hard time wrapping my head around it, but it's really interesting. 4 p.m. October 23rd. And then is it a Zoom link, or how do I get into it?
I think there'll be a Zoom link. I think there should be a Zoom link included, or if you RSVP, you should receive a Zoom link for
in the chat. I placed the address for the Folklore Archive. What you need to do is to send an email message to the Folklore Archivist, who will then promptly respond with the link.
Okay, Folklore Archivist.
So,
cool.
Other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. You'll excuse me. I'm in Georgia right now. It's a little bit. It's dark outside, so you'll excuse me for that. Yeah, so my name is Brenda. I'm a recent graduate from Cornell, and I'm interested in the folklore program. I want to explore questions of gender and sexuality in post-colonial African states and how they relate to how they're in constant interaction with culture. And I was wondering if there are specific folklore material, like specific to African countries. I know I was looking through the archive and other material resources, and I didn't manage to see any. So I was wondering if I could be able to learn about the resources on the material specific to African countries.
That's a great question. One thing I would point out is we have a real crackerjack Department of Gender and Women's Studies. We have some of the leaders in the field in the world. I mean, Mel Chen, you may have heard of Judith Butler. These are people on the faculty. And frankly, what we often find is that if you get the theory, if you learn the depth of those perspectives, then you can do a lot of the work yourself. You can be the pioneer who begins to open up some of those issues. We also have amazing graduate students who are working specifically on some of these issues in Africa, in Senegal, in a range of different countries. So really strong faculty members in gender and women's studies on campus, and a number of African specialists. And frankly, you might have to make the bridge. And we would love to see you do it.
We also have a really excellent Center for African Studies, which is also where the FLAS for various opportunities for language study and travel to different parts of Africa would be housed. I think, I mean, Africa is, as you know, extremely big, so and incredibly diverse. So I've got some very good contacts at the University of Jos in Nigeria, who I work with on storytelling in borderland regions. And I know we've had longstanding relationships both with North Africa and other parts of Southern Africa. But I think what types of resources would be available to you. We would help you make the contacts so that you would get access to resources. And one of the things that, of course, is really important as a graduate student is the type of support that you need, both for language, but also for travel. And so, as Professor Briggs pointed out, we've got a great series of scholars who are world renowned in women and gender studies, but we also have huge amounts of resources and connections. I think that's one of the things that I've learned by being associated with various relatively high-profile universities, is that coming from Berkeley, well, as you know, coming from Cornell, it opens doors that otherwise may not be as easily opened. So it's a great position to be coming from.
If I can just add to Brenda, I work in South Africa primarily, mostly in Cape Town and then in Makanda, all along the Eastern Cape. And I was worried too, if you're looking at just the materials that we've aggregated in the archive itself, it's like, okay, if that's not here, how am I going to interact? But I think for me, the powerful thing that this really represents is the fact that we're hopefully on different terms, and this is a turning point in epistemologies and the way anthropology and the way folklore as a discipline is centered. And I want to make the archives. I want the communities in which I work with to make the archives, not just Berkeley, not just students here. And so what I do, I build archival software and I work with archives in South Africa, and we digitize our own collections. And for me, it's like, this is, as Tim and everybody else has said, this is the springboard to do what you need to do, as I see it. But it's also awesome coming from Berkeley. I was at University of Cape Town just catching this amazing lecture by Dr. Quentin Williams, and he threw out the phrase metadiscursive. and he kept saying metadiscursive, and I was like, I think I know where this is coming from. And I like went up to him and I talked to him and I was like, oh, I'm from Berkeley. He's like, do you know Dr. Briggs? And I was like, yeah, he's my advisor. And it was like, holy crap. So I'm being a nerd, but you know, the connections are there, but it also enables us to do our own work, which is rad.
We're stealing more of your time than we anticipated. If there's one more burning question, please jump in there.
I do have one. So my name is Marcelo. I actually am a recent graduate from Berkeley, and I'm looking into the folklore program. I actually had Professor Briggs' class a year ago. And what I wanted to ask is actually two questions, but one's very short. One is, what is the department's attitude towards recent Cal alums applying to the MA program? And the second being, in terms of like research and wanting to go internationally to do field work and ethnographic work, what does that process look like? Because, for example, I want to do research in Latin America and document the medicinal practices there, at least the those that happen in the rural areas. And so I just want to see what that process kind of looked like.
Well, great to see you again. I'll tell you, there used to be this thing at Berkeley where we didn't want to bring our own undergraduates into graduate programs. And frankly, that's wrong for a lot of reasons. One of them is that's a racialized policy, right? The idea is you should have no commitment to your family, to your place. Go elsewhere. Go wherever your own individual personal interest serves you. And frankly, that's a bad policy. I've always opposed it. We have absolutely no problem with looking as seriously as possible. By the way, good to see you again. You know, we take all applications seriously, and there's no way in which we would turn down a Berkeley application if the person was qualified. So you're most welcome to apply. Boy, travel and Latin. But first of all, we really want people to work wherever they need to work. And some people work, I should say, in museums. They work with literary texts. They work in historical archives. But people often do want to do ethnomusicological, ethnographic work, and we fully support that. We have a fair amount of funding that we use precisely to help students be able to travel during the summer after their first year, to be able to go places and really get depth and do a master's thesis, which, by the way, can be the most important research you do in your entire life. It's got to be smaller than a dissertation because it has to be crammed into, I'll tell you, 2 years of the program is an amazingly intense time. And to be able to do the field work in 2 or 3 months and then write that up over the course of the next year is a lot. But we really want you to be able to go where you need to go. And we've had folks go all over the world. We had a student who had never learned a word of Vietnamese, took Vietnamese during the summer before she came with one of those wonderful foreign language and area studies fellowships, was supported by that program all the way through. After her first year, went and did field work in Vietnam. Right? And with our support, as well as with more support from the FLOSS program. So we're fully, fully supportive. Now, there's this little thing called COVID-19. So that makes the world very uncertain. Right now, frankly, you want to, on your applications, carve out a really focused proposal for master's thesis research. That doesn't mean you have to do it when you're here. If your interests change, if you want to frame it in different ways, that's fine. But it shows us that you can do that. You can do something that's compelling, that's original, and that really queries something important in the world. And we'll do everything in the world to be able to support that. If I were configuring something like that right now, I might say, well, I would like to be able to go to wherever and do this in person, but also here's a way in which I would try to be able to do that research project if travel and in-person research are no longer possible. But we don't think that people have to do field work elsewhere. Some people do field work within precisely the communities in which they live, and that's great too, right? But on the other hand, we're fully supportive, both financially and intellectually. And again, you know, we have some of the leading area studies centers, as I think Professor Tanglini was suggesting, in the world. And faculty members from those areas are very supportive of our students. So I want to say thank you so much to all of you. Thanks to the Berkeley participants. Thanks to all of you for coming in today. You know where to find us. We all have email addresses. We would love to be able to answer your questions. If you have specific questions about applying to the program or about the requirements, Tabea Mastel is the Folklore Graduate Student Affairs Officer. You'll find her on the website. She's really good on the administrative details. Professor Tangolini is the Faculty Graduate Advisor. I'm the chair of the program with things about, the overall philosophy orientation and those sorts of things about the program. I'd like to propose this kind of research. Does that really fit in terms of what Berkeley is able to support? Please feel free to direct questions to us. I'll tell you, I'm almost as excited about this program as Cameron and Julia and Hector. I mean, because their inspiration, their excitement is catching. So I would be glad to interact with you. We're really looking forward to seeing your applications before, by the December deadline. So, stay in touch. Look forward to hearing more from you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Watch the debate and don't forget to vote, folks, if you're able to vote.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.